We don't always find ourselves in the midst of doing the thing that we love doing more than anything. Life has other demands of us. Life has other situations that, I think are important for us. We need to be challenged in certain ways so that we learn and grow, and there are often things that we wouldn't choose for ourselves. But that's part of the spice of life, is the surprises, the things that we never that we never chose, that we find ourselves in the midst of.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Hello, everyone. How you doing? How are you doing out there? You podcast people. It's Brandon and Evan. We're back. Another conversation, just the two of us. And we're going to talk about some stuff that, I don't know, we bounced around a lot before we actually hit record here. So you probably read the title, but if you didn't, whatever you're doing, do it with dignity. That's what we called this one. And we're going to get into what that means. We're going to talk about that. We're going to figure this out. But yeah, this is going to be interesting, and I want to start this one by saying, this isn't about, especially this conversation, this isn't about us kind of giving you an answer. This isn't about us giving you some life advice. This is a lot going to be about us working this out between the two of us and figuring out what is this and why do we think this way? And, let's really look at it. So I'm excited. I always am for these conversations. It's going to be an investigation and exploration. I think it's going to be pretty cool. So, is there anything that you want to kind of clarify off the top, Evan, that you feel like people need to know about this one?
I think that the only thing I'll say is like really our take on this one, because, we bring up the word dignity and it's like, well, that can raise some questions like, well, what do we mean? Like, what is acting with dignity? Because there can be a lot of sort of, there can be a type of a moral imposition that can maybe come in with something like that. Like, what is acting with dignity? And that can get into the weeds a little bit. But like everything we try to talk about on this podcast, we're coming at this from like the angle of an artist. And in fact, part of how we arrived to this topic, which is kind of a surprise for me today of how this all started to form together, but is also extremely relevant and pertinent for some stuff that I've been doing just on my own, but in like my classes and stuff like that. It relates to a lot of how I teach and approach acting and stuff. So I think there's a really cool element of like artistic angle on this thing of dignity. And so yeah, I think that's the main thing for me to put out there as we make our way into this conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the big things too that we got to mention off the top is that, whatever you do it with dignity. It's like whatever you're doing, I think this is like a good way to start things off. Is like whatever you're doing, are you half-assing it? Is it half-baked? Is it like a half attempt? Are you just kind of mailing it in? And I mean, I think a lot of this conversation kind of stirred up for me because something that I've noticed is a lot of people don't really do things. They don't really do them. They kind of just mail it in. They like one things that I just don't get. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it. It's like, why do you shuffle your feet? Why do people walk around? They pick up your feet and walk. You know what I mean? But it's like people shuffle their feet, and there's like a psychological thing to a foot shuffler. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a laziness. It's a dragging. It's literally a dragging of your body from one location to the next. And there's a psychology to that. And if you're going to walk somewhere, walk somewhere. You know what I mean? If you're going to do something, do it. Um, and not just do it, not just fully do the thing, but like try to do it well, you know? And I think that there's this, the thing that really kind of baffles me and I want to say bothers me is this consistent witnessing of people settling for mediocrity and just accepting that and embracing it even. And it just really irks me because I feel like it's unconscious. I don't feel like people realize they're doing it. And I think if you become aware of it, like if it's a cold water, like splash in your face kind of wake up call, you'll kind of go, why am I doing that? Why am I settling for mediocrity? And why am I being mediocre in what I do? And so kind of the, whatever you're doing, like do it, like do the thing. Don't do it like in a mediocre way. Do it with greatness, do it with excellence, do it with a certain kind of pride, you know, and care. Because I feel like unless you do that, you're never going to really know what you're capable of and what your options are. And it bothers me when people talk about how they don't have options, they don't have time, they don't have money, they don't have these things they want, and yet they settle for mediocrity on a regular basis. And it's just like, of course you don't. Stop settling for mediocrity in just the way you do your life. And I think a big thing would change. So anyway, that's kind of, if I'm going to talk about the fire under me, it's that I just like get mediocrity away from me, you know, get it away from you. I just don't think that we should. And I think as an artist, I mean, maybe I'll just bring this in as an artist, you're just not really allowed to do that. Like if you want to have an actual career in the arts, like mediocrity is not really accepted because it's such a competitive, it's such a value-based type of industry, you know, whatever art you're in. So you don't really get the luxury of just kind of mailing it in. You know, some people do, and some people kind of, they feel like they're on a pedestal and they can, but you know, they get knocked off and someone takes that over, right? And there's a reason for that. So anyway, I'll stop there, but that's kind of the fire under my ass about this, you know, what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to. Don't want to stomp on your fire or anything. I just want to quickly address this comment about mediocrity, because again, like there are some things that when we talk about them, particularly in sort of Western culture, you know, just like don't settle for mediocrity. That can make us think of stuff like, you know, you gotta kind of like rah Tony Robbins, make millions of dollars, be a big deal, all this stuff. That's not the kind of mediocrity that we're talking about, because that's all status and symbol and blah 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 blah. And none of that necessarily has any kind of meaning. Not that it's meaningless, but it isn't. That doesn't inherently have meaning to it. We're talking about a different kind of mediocrity, and that's kind of the mediocrity of yourself and your capacity. You know, it's like there's this sort of saying of like, don't compare yourself to others, compare yourself to yourself. You know, like, are you pushing yourself? Are you doing the best that you can in whatever you're doing? Which is part of what the title of this is, like, whatever you're doing, you're doing, wherever you find yourself, if you really bring something to it, if you really bring yourself to it and bring your best and throw yourself into whatever it is that you're doing, you break out of that space of mediocrity, essentially. So that I just want to clarify that like, we're not talking about mediocrity in a sense that we might conventionally think about it. We're talking about mediocrity in a much deeper level, because that kind of mediocrity of, like, you know, living in a big house and, you know, being famous and all that stuff, that's actually a very superficial kind of like way in which we measure mediocrity, of, like, you know, these sort of status symbols, you know, what your paycheck is and all of that. And I also want to add too, because you were commenting on how the artist can't settle for mediocrity, in the sense that, well, that also makes it in many in many ways it can make it more difficult to make a living, because that comes through. Though I don't think that that's always the case, because I can listen to the top 40 and there's definitely not much that I would call artistry that's often going on in there. There's entertainment that's going on in there. There's definitely something going on. I don't know if I would necessarily call all of it art, but also throwing in the artist lens, throwing yourself into something is the only way that you might actually stumble upon this thing that's actually called art too. For you to actually find out what that thing is. Because like I said, we can create something that is within the realm in an artistic field, but we can still look at something that's in that field and say somehow that it isn't art. And again, that's a subjective thing, but that's still a very real experience that we've all had at some level. Someone makes a song and we're like, what is this shit? Someone might really love it and they think it's art, but maybe for us, we don't. But in many ways, there's sort of this experience that you have for yourself when you're creating something that we might call artful. So I know I've kind of I've said a lot of things here. I've kind of ranted a little bit, but I wanted to set the table a little bit with a few of these things before we carried on.
Well, you did a good job of setting the table, and there's a lot of avenues that I want to go off on all that you said. Let me start with this. I think this is the most important, so I'll start with it. I think what we're talking about, and I think it kind of comes back to this in most conversations, really, and you can correct me if you don't agree, but that it all comes down to your experience of whatever you're doing, your experience of your life, your experience of this. So like, if you do it fully, you'll experience more joy, you'll experience more happiness, you'll experience more of yourself. And ultimately that will bring you more joy and happiness and fulfillment. And this whole thing that you brought out about like, success related, like don't settle for mediocrity. Like you could be a millionaire. Like that's an outward in kind of style of doing life. And I think that's kind of, if there's a matrix, that's what people are brainwashed into, that they somehow need to find happiness by going out there and getting it and then bring it back in. I think I'm more.
And just sort of quickly, I want to say, and the thing is, like, you could still get all of those external things and still have this incredible feeling of mediocrity amongst all of it.
Yes. And I'm not saying that getting those things is bad by any means, by all means.
No, not at all.
Go ahead and go get them, like get the big house and get the fancy car and whatever you want to do. But don't do that to fill up what's inside of you. Like I think sports cars are cool, and being able to have a really cool fast car to drive around. I mean, sure, that'd be fun. But if you need the fast car to be fulfilled, there's a problem. There's a real problem. And it's trying to solve the mediocrity inside of you through outside things is not going to solve it. It's not going to solve the problem. But when you do like the simplest actions, but you do them fully and you do them with commitment and you do them with excellence and you try to figure out how to do this thing well, that brings a certain personal sense of pride. And I forget his name, but one of the greatest basketball coaches, college coaches, what he used to do is he used to get his players, like they won so many championships, very famous. Someone who knows sports on the other end is probably thinking of the name. Bear with me. Anyway, one of the things he would get the players to do, and the reason why they won so much, was because he would get them to do basic things like tie your shoes perfectly, because it's like, you're going to play basketball, you're going to be out there on the court, you're going to be playing competitively, like, and your shoes aren't tied properly. I mean, like, it's such a basic, simple thing, but it's so fundamental, foundational, and important. And so what I'm really trying to get to in my own life, and I think with everything we talk about, is an inside out model of how you approach the world. being that by finding it in yourself, you can then express, acquire, build, make in the world outside of you. And through finding a sense of fulfillment and happiness and joy and excellence inside yourself, you extend those things outward and they get created around you. And if you try to do it the other way, you never really will feel that feeling inside of you for much longer than a few moments. Like, and maybe it'll last for a few weeks, maybe it'll even last for a few months, but it always goes away. And, you know, again, you're left with the same problem over and over and over again. So there's a lot to chew on there. I get it. But the main point is, don't be mediocre in the way that you do things, because if you do them fully, you get to experience yourself fully. And if you do them like with mediocrity, you get to experience a mediocre version of yourself, which is why you're probably unhappy, depressed, unfulfilled, jealous, envious, all these shitty things that come out of us. Because when you're not really doing it, you get that reflected out. You pointed this out earlier, Evan. You get that reflected out in others in the world. And that's why you're jealous of them, because they're doing the thing that you know you could do well, but you're not. And that's why it hurts, in my opinion.
Yeah. Of just giving yourself to something, because there's like, again, I think that there's this, it's funny because I was going over this with my students last night in class, you know, because I talk about just the reality of doing and as actors really doing what you're doing as much as possible. And they were going through this one exercise, and I had to stop them because basically in this exercise, you know, I'm asking them to repeat exactly what their partner says to them. You know, that's all you do. Just repeat exactly what you hear. And inevitably what happens, you know, with anybody who comes up through this work is little things get left out. It's like you left out the that they said in there, or they said a word twice in their sentence, and you removed one of those things. And I said, and I always was like, no, you have to repeat exactly what you heard them say. You have to really do that, because you let that thing slide, then another thing slides, then another thing slides. And especially since we're trying to cultivate this thing of attention, like really do this thing, you know, and these little things matter, you know. And I think that within anything that we do in our lives, when we don't really go forward and do what we're doing, and I think that there's real wisdom to this, because this is something that's alluded to in a lot of sort of like little like Zen parables about just no matter what it is, you really do it, because there's life and fulfillment in doing that thing, you know, in ways that you might not fully understand. But the fact of the matter is that wherever you are, that's where you are. Whatever you're doing, that's what you're doing. So you might as well give yourself fully to doing that thing, you know, because otherwise, like with this half in, half out, like we're living in this kind of state of limbo, and that begins to become more and more of our lives. We're just sort of in this zombified limbo state of living. And listen, it's not always easy, and especially like right now, like the time that we're in, you know, lots of people have been forced to do jobs and to take I mean, that's not necessarily a new thing, but on a greater level than we've maybe seen it before. You know, people are having to do things that they never, you know, thought that they would have to do, or take jobs they didn't think that they would have to take to get by. And there's a lot of that can be a hard thing to do, you know, especially, you know, if we came from doing something that was very meaningful to us, or, you know, we were on a career path that was rewarding to us, and now suddenly we find ourselves in this place. And, you know, like, I'm not going to say don't grieve that to some level. That's a challenging thing to do. But right now there's an opportunity. to really do whatever the hell it is that you're doing. You're banging groceries, you're pumping gas, you know, you're serving coffees, whatever it is, you can bring a quality of attention to doing that that will invigorate you as a person, that will bring life into what you're doing, because we're kind of built for that. There's something that incredible that happens to us when we fully throw ourselves into something, you know, and we know when we're not doing that. You know, like I want to, an image that came to my mind like earlier in this conversation, and I want to bring this back into sort of like the acting world. This is something that always drives me crazy, whether I'm watching a play or, you know, more often a movie or a TV show. When somebody picks up a drink and has a drink from it, and there's so clearly nothing in that cup. There's nothing in there, or it's like, you know, like people didn't really, they go to fill themselves a cup of coffee and it's like, and you look, it's like, how much did you actually pour in there? Like, what did you pour in? Like a half inch of fluid into that thing? I'm already pulled out of it. Like, you've broken my sense of reality of what's going on. And this is not so different from how we operate in our lives. You know, you didn't actually fill that cup. You didn't actually really do the thing. I know it's bullshit. And we as an audience know it's bullshit. And everyone else around, like, we, at some level, not only do we know that it happened for ourselves, but other people know it too. It's a kind of an energetic type of a thing. People notice.
Mm-hmm. People do notice. And also these things that you're doing in a mediocre way, they have an impact, and they start to accumulate. Those impacts begin to accumulate on top of each other. And eventually they become a problem. I'll give you an example. Let me start with a parable, kind of a story that I think will be a good parable to this. There's a town. This is a story. I like this little story. There's a town, and they decide, hey, you know what? We're going to have a celebration. We're going to celebrate this beautiful town we have, this beautiful community, all this stuff, whatever. And they have this big barrel in the middle of town. And so they say, well, everybody take a bottle of wine from your family home and pour it into the keg. And on the night of the keg, of the celebration, I mean, we'll all drink wine and we'll all share and we'll all, you know, do this. So everybody takes their wine and pours it in. And then the night of the celebration, all that pours out of the keg is water. Because every single person put in water. They didn't put in the wine. And every single person thought, I could get away with it. And, you know, this is mediocrity. Right? This is what it looks like. It's a disappointment. It's a major letdown. And there's a lot of planning and stuff that goes into your life and things that you want and hopes and dreams. And then you end up with nothing at the end of the day, because you continually put mediocrity into this keg of your dream, of your vision, of your life, of yourself. And, you know, not there's anything wrong with water, but it's like, come on, you know what I mean? So, you know, there's where I work right now, this Joe job. I mean, look, I'm doing a job. This wasn't the job that I was planning on doing right now at this point in my life, but, you know, crazy times call for crazy measures, and it is what it is. But you know what? I'm going to do this job with excellence because it's what I'm doing. And something happened the other day. We deal with these steel pallets, super heavy things. They're like, you know, anywhere from 1,000 pounds to 4,000 pounds each pallet. And you get 12 of them stacked on top of each other. I mean, you do the math, you know, that's a lot of weight. And what happened was, where we were stocking a bunch of these pallets for orders that were about to get shipped out, is the people who are putting them in, they were doing little things of mediocrity. So they're like a little inch off here, a little inch off there, a little inch off, whatever. And when the pallets are low and you're only building a few of them up, it's not that big of a deal because they're not going to really fall over. There's a low base. But when they start getting, you know, 8, 10, 12 high, those things could fall over and kill somebody. Like they will literally just crush somebody. And when you look at it, it looks like this leaning tower And one of the guys that had to go along and put stickers on these things to mark them all, for shipping out, he was like, he had to walk away from it because he was like, he's just like, I don't feel safe. And, and what happened was the guys who were stocking those pallets, they just put they just mailed it in over here, mailed it in over here, mailed it in over here. And before you know it, little by little, it didn't look so bad. But when you look at the whole thing, it looks really bad. And it becomes like literally life threatening. I just think that, there's so many things that are like that. And we get away with them on the small scale. So we think we can get away with them, but they add up. And eventually, our own life becomes threatened by our own mediocrity, by our own mailing it in, by our own half-assing it. When you commit to your actions, whatever you do, if you do it fully and you try to do it well every time and you try to do it with precision, you get the best possible outcome. You set yourself up for the most amount of success and you make your life easier. And it just does so many things that are good for you. Plus, it gives you a sense of pride. When you mail it in, when you look at your life's work after you've mailed it in, enough days, enough weeks, enough months, enough years, enough decades of doing that, and it starts to look pretty ugly. So the best way to turn around the course is start with the smallest things. When you brush your teeth, really brush your teeth. When you clean your house, clean the corners, clean this stuff. Don't just, really try to do it well. And
don't just sweep the dust under the rug.
Exactly. And it's like, yes, you can get away with it. And I mean, I'm saying this as much to myself as I'm saying it to everyone else, because this is the stuff that we all need to hear. Yes, in that moment, you could probably get away with it and no one will notice. But if that's how you do your life, I mean, eventually it's going to become noticeable. And probably more people are noticing it than you realize. And that's also people's perception of you. And then you're noticing it because you can't get away with it. At the end of the day, you always know you did it. And that's your perception of yourself. And it's just it's a downfall of us, it's this mediocre way of just settling.
Yeah. And the ultimate person who pays for it is ourselves. Right. And interesting, the whole thing of like getting away with things, getting away with it when that's where you're coming from, that is like, that's basically where it ends. Like that's the best that getting away with it gets you, is like, oh, I got away with it. You don't go any further than that. It only goes worse from there, because usually, and you were kind of alluding to this, eventually you hit a point where there's no getting away with it anymore, right? There's a point where it piles up. You've got a stack of thousands of pounds of steel pallets that could fall over and kill somebody, and that could get you fired from your job, right? Like that's just from not really doing it, in some ways. Like, I kind of want to steer away from this word of mediocrity. It's fine.
Yeah,
but
it's
like,
not the point of the conversation.
Yeah. But like, it's because really it's still the same thing as like not really doing what you're doing. That's when something like that happens, you're not really doing the thing you're doing. It's like you are somewhere else. You're not giving yourself fully into something, and you pay a price for that. And it's funny because like there's that sort of, it's becoming kind of pretty common in our sort of lexicon now in humanity. But this idea of our outer world just reflects our inner world, right? And
our inner world reflects our outer world, or our outer world is actually what's inside. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So it's just like, it always starts inside.
Right.
Everything always starts inside, and then the
but
outside
what you're
world
outside is actually telling you what you've been putting out from the inside. Yeah.
Exactly. The outer world is just reflecting what's inside, right? And there's a lot. This is something I believe is true. I'll just wear that on my sleeve. And that's the thing, is like in a situation like that, you know, by not really doing it, you are creating an environment for something really bad to happen. It's like, oh, I got fired from my job because of this thing. Those pallets were fine. They were fine, blah, 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 blah. But they weren't, and you didn't get away with it at a certain point. And now you're in a situation where, because of your inner space, it's impacted what you're doing on the outside, and now it's come back to you. As opposed to, if you really did it and you really did a good job and you strived for excellence, not only do you have a certain sense of dignity and pride in yourself for doing something well, but there's a different outcome that happens as a result of that. There is a recognition of like, whoa, you're doing great work. You're doing something, and there's a new door that's open to you. I mean, that's not necessarily always going to happen. I think just you were discussing recently, Brandon, about sometimes you might find yourself in a situation with people who don't appreciate, people who don't recognize and value you for doing great work. That happens, and in those situations, I always encourage, like, well, you should probably find somewhere else to be, and do with your time, right? But I'm getting a little bit lost here, but I think that for me, when coming into this conversation, and what has been so mostly important for me in all of this is just that there is real quality of life in just giving ourselves into doing whatever we're doing. Like there's so much that can emerge as a result of that. And it doesn't matter what it is, because I've done jobs and taken jobs, that weren't my passion. And I'm not saying to anybody, if you're in a position and you have a dream of doing something else, this is not saying give that up. I'm saying pursue that. Absolutely. Continue to throw yourself into that as much as you possibly can, but sometimes we're in a circumstance where it's like, just to get by, to survive, it's necessary that you have to take a job or take on some sort of a task that isn't your first, second, or third choice even. But that's still something you're doing. That's still something that you're putting your time into doing. And if you're going to do it, then bring yourself into it. Give yourself to it as much as you possibly can, and go for excellence, like you were saying. Like do something really well. I worked behind as a barista and bartender and stuff. And I really, when I started that job, I really took to learning everything I could about the coffee. It's like, okay, like, how are we doing this? Like, measuring how much dry coffee comes out and how long it takes for the coffee to come out of the espresso machine, learning how to like dial it in to get like that perfect combination of how the coffee comes together for the best taste, like really throwing myself into that. That was something that I really latched onto, and in a way, I still have a really great passion for it. I'm not doing it anymore other than making my own coffee at home, or really appreciating and enjoying a good coffee when I'm out. But like I learned a real skill and gained a real knowledge about something that I interact with on a daily basis in my life, just simply because I decided to just throw myself into it. I decided to learn and to try and do it extremely well, as well as I possibly could. So, and the whole time I did that job, there was a joy I took in doing that, in going through these processes to try and give some people a really great fucking coffee, and seeing people happy, like having people be like, oh my God, you are my savior today. Or even people saying
yeah.
that it was the best coffee that they've ever had in their entire life. You know, like I had people say that to me, and that's like, wow, like that feels great. This isn't my ultimate goal for where I want to go in my life, but you know what? Doing this is a hell of a lot better. Getting that kind of feedback and interaction, you know, from someone else, or just from the pride of knowing that I gave the best thing that I could to people. And maybe they don't recognize it in that moment because people are in their own worlds very often. But, you know, it left the door open for something really cool to happen. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
That's great. I mean, that's excellence, right? That is excellence manifested. And excellence manifested is very interesting. I got two stories I got to share. Because people talk about, you know, being discovered in the film industry. Well, in some ways I was, because I never planned on being an actor. Like, I mean, I kind of wanted to when I was a kid, but for people who haven't heard the story, I told my parents and they said, well, that's only for certain people. And I was a kid and I believed them. And this sounds stupid to even say this, but when you're a kid and your parents tell you stuff in a weird way, or your brothers or your older siblings, a lot of time you just believe them. And sometimes you're like, no, what? That's not true at all. And you have this discovery, like, but I carried this belief for a long time. I really just believed that only certain people, you know, it was like, and I was weird. And then one day I made a film. I ended up getting to the film industry because I started as a filmmaker, but I still never really planned on being an actor. I just didn't think it was something I could do. And two interesting things happened. One was I started working for a restaurant as a busboy, and I did the busboy job. I did it with excellence. I did it really well. I bussed those tables. You know what I mean? I walked around with a smile. I did the best I could. And one day, a now very famous actress who wasn't so famous at the time, Colby Smulders, came walking up to me. I don't know who this was. And she said, hey, my acting agent wants to meet you. Are you interested in talking to him? And I said, sure. Walked over to their table. This is an acting agent. And he had a bunch of his actors out and they were celebrating. So people had gotten some gigs and whatever. And he said, hey, you know, he's like, what's going on? What's your story? And I told him, you know, I'm busting tables, but I just moved to Vancouver. And he said, you know, you got a good look. He's like, why don't you come in to my office? Let's have a meeting. You know, are you interested in acting? It's like, yeah, that'd be cool. And I went in, I had a meeting. He gave me a scene. I prepared it, came in, did a read. A few days later, took me on. I got an acting agent. All of a sudden I went from nothing to I'm in the industry with an acting agent. And then that lined me up for my next teacher. And then here's another thing. So later, you know, I was still in university and whatever, and, you know, a kid, and I was selling shoes, another glorious job, you know, dream job. Right. And I'm selling shoes. And my acting teacher would joke about this, or she wouldn't joke, she would seriously say, you know, Brandon, when he sells shoes with gusto. Because I did. I just like, if I'm going to sell those shoes, I want to know everything about every shoe in this store. And I just did it with excellence. Well, a casting director came in one day, didn't know this person at all, never met them. And I sold them a pair of shoes. And they were actually an actress at the time, quite successful. And they said, you know, I've never had anyone sell me a pair of shoes like this before. And we changed contact. She became a cast director. I ended up getting my first commercial because of this person. So something totally unrelated, bussing tables. Well, it seems a little more connected, you know, when people think about, but selling shoes and then that lining up to like, you end up getting like a role on television. Like, you know, it's like, that's what excellence does. But if you do things, if you just mail it in, you don't make an impression on anybody. You don't feel good about it. And you just don't know. I mean, you could be in the most dead end job in the world and you just don't know. But if you start doing things really with excellence, like you're making an impression on people. And those are two people that were very pinnacle and key in my life who I made an impression on, obviously. And it opened up the door for me in ways that never would have been opened. And, you know, you can be sitting there going like, oh, you know, I'm so unlucky. It never happens for me. And it's like, yeah, because when you're half-assing everything, no one cares. At least nobody cares because everybody's half-assing it. So, like one of the ways to be the first person through the door is just do things with excellence, and I think it's twofold. One, you feel great about yourself, you feel good at your job, you get excellent reviews if you want to go to another place, and you don't know, there might be an opportunity that comes out of it. And I've had two basically like bottom line jobs, you know what I mean, minimum wage paying jobs that have opened up incredible doors for me and created opportunities. So the proof's in the pudding. It's just like, it is there. And I think that, we would do well to remind each other of this, just fully do the thing, just do it well, do it the best, do it with excellence. And
I think there's a quality of your character, of who you are, that comes out when you really give yourself to it. And people are attracted to that. It attracts people, and they might not even necessarily know what it is. They're just like, oh, there's something about it. Like, I'm sure, as you were busting tables at that job, like, yeah, you had a look, but it's like, in a certain way, you kind of attracted that too. I'm sure you were out there, you were busting tables, you were doing your jobs, you're probably smiling, you were friendly, like you were giving it, you were committing to what you were doing. Even while there were other plans, for the future that were going on, but you're giving yourself to it at that moment, and people pick up on that and they go, who is this person? Because I see it and it's like, I don't know if they're an actor, but I like their look. I don't have anyone in my roster who's got a look like that, and I could get someone like that work. And then it's like, well, let's see if they can act. Like I can tell that they're a hard worker, and I can tell that they're kind of charismatic through the way that they're, there's like, there are all kinds of little things that, whether, again, they were conscious of it exactly or not, but there are things that get picked up on there too.
Well, you know what, Evan, can I just stop more?
Yeah, go.
We wouldn't even be having this conversation if I didn't do that way.
Yeah.
Because you and I met on a commercial, which was actually, I think, the first commercial I ever got. I think it was the first. And I think that other one I referred to as my second or third. But that only happened because of these series of events. Now, the thing is like, it's more than serendipitous. You know what I mean? And these, like, the fact that I just feel so lucky to have these conversations with you, honestly. Like, and I don't mean to get all sappy here. I'm just like, I love the fact that we get to, once a week, we sit down and we talk about something about life in this way. And we refer to our art, and we try to work this shit out. I love that. And it's hard for me to even imagine what my life would be like without this. This is such a important part of my life. But there is another life out there where this never happened, and I wouldn't know any better. And I feel like so much of our lives are like that. And it starts with really doing whatever you're doing, because that can lead you into that life that you don't even know you could have. And you just don't know, but that's why, I always say to my classes and my students and clients, I just say, you're never out of the game. Just don't ever have that belief. Like, once you decide you're out of the game and you start mailing it in, you start like, you just think it's over for you. It is over. There's an incredible amount of fight that is in a human being, an incredible amount of potential. It doesn't matter how old you are. Like, it doesn't matter what place you're in your life. It doesn't matter how many things have gone wrong, how much you fucked up along the way. And, there is always a chance for things to just totally turn in an incredible way. But it's got to start with you. With every single person, it's got to start with that person. And I think it's really got to start with you really doing whatever it is that you're doing. And then there's that dignity in that. And I think that dignity is what people get attracted to.
Mm-hmm. Part of what you're saying, and you even brought up the word, it makes me think of something that Ted Whittle said to us in a podcast a little while ago. But, it's like treating what you're doing like it matters, because it does. it does matter what you're doing. And maybe you don't see it exactly how it does. I've been in that place before. I'm sure I will probably be in that space again where I'm like, oh my God, is what I'm doing even matter? Does this even matter?
Oh yeah, I can relate. Yeah.
It matters. It matters. Trust that it matters somehow. Because I think that through that acknowledgement is a place where we can start to build into that place of like, okay, well then I'm going to really do this. I'm going to really do this thing that I'm involved with right now. I think it's a great, I don't know. I think it's just a great starting point for us to build there. And like you said, again, it's like, it's mostly, it's so important just for us, like it's important for, and by us, I mean like for us as individuals to act and be from that place.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think, something that actually you pointed out through what Ted Whittle had said is like, yeah, do it like it matters. And like, so imagine that whatever it is you're doing does matter. Figure out like, why does it matter? Why might it matter? Like convince yourself it matters, like, because I think sometimes, I just learned from my mentors, like, I'll ask them, okay, you tell me to do this. I'm going to do it because I trust you. But why? Can you tell me why? And sometimes it'll be like, just go do it and you'll find out. But sometimes they'll just be like, yeah, because this, and this. Oh, great. And I find a lot of time the why helps me in a big way. It helps me understand, oh, I see why you're telling me to do that. And, among other things, this, and this, among other things, it's like those you'll figure out, you know what I mean? But it's like, that's kind of the way I think that we all could, that's a philosophy. You can like, why does it matter that I brush my teeth well? Like, think that one out. Why do you think, why does it matter that I clean the corners or don't just sweep the dust under the rug? Or why does it matter that I don't stack these pallets a little inch off here and an inch off there? Like if you really think it out, you're going to start to find out the reason why. And the reason why is extremely powerful, and it gives a lot of clarity, and it helps you have a sense of purpose. It's like a lot of times people don't follow the rules because the rules are meaningless to them. But if you look at a rule and you go, well, why do we have this rule? And if you understand why the rule is there, you might be more inclined to follow it. Not that following rules is better, but here's the thing. If you break it, you'll know what you're actually breaking, as opposed to, I just like fuck authority. Like, I don't care. I don't ever want to be told what to do. It's like such a mailed in response for a lot of people. And it's not a bad response. Sometimes defiance is awesome, but sometimes it's better to actually know the rule you're breaking, the ethic you're breaking, the thing you're breaking. And then you can go, okay, well, like it says, the speed limit's this, but I'm going over that. It's like, well, the speed limit's there for safety, but like, if you really think out this thing, you might go, well, it's not just safety for others, it's safety for me. And you start to really think it out. You might go, okay, well, I'm willing to push on this. And you do it from a place of intelligence and a place of connectedness, and then maybe you don't, in certain scenarios, and maybe you save your own life or someone else's because you actually are like actually going, no, this is safe. I'm actually going to go slower than the speed limit. And, the road's snowy or wet or dark or foggy. And it's just like, if you put the care and attention into whatever you're doing and you really try to do it well, it's not just do it right, it's just do it well.
Yeah.
A lot of the answers start coming out. They start surfacing for you.
Yeah. I think in many ways, like, it's kind of what we're talking about is like, it doesn't really matter what you do. What matters is the way in which you do it.
Yeah.
It often has a lot more to do with the success that we have, the happiness and the fulfillment that we have. It has a lot more to do with it. Like one of my favorite authors, Dan Millman, who wrote Way of the Peaceful Warrior. One of his sort of common tropes, I guess, comments is, he says he says a peaceful warrior doesn't just do what they love, but they find the love in what they do, which I think has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. It's a recognition that, yeah, sometimes we don't always find ourselves in the midst of doing the thing that we love doing more than anything. Life has other demands of us. Life has other situations that, I think are important for us. We need to be challenged in certain ways so that we learn and grow. And there are often things that we wouldn't choose for ourselves, but that's part of the spice of life, is the surprises, the things that we never chose, that we find ourselves in the midst of. And it's in those moments where we can bemoan our situation. We can judge our situation as being less than. But I mean, again, I think that, we, in the title of this, we bring up this thing called dignity. And the more we talk about it, the more I'm convinced that dignity has everything to do with the way that you're doing it. To take something if you're scrubbing toilets, man, be an artist of scrubbing toilets. There's dignity in doing something and really doing it, bringing something incredible to yourself, to having someone come in and use that washroom that you just cleaned, and people are just like, holy shit, this washroom is pristine. I've had that experience of being like, oh my God, I feel like just at home in here. Like, I feel so like that's like bringing something that you wouldn't expect to the level of artistry. That's bringing like a quality, a way of doing something to your work, and you can have pride in doing that. It has nothing to do with the thing that you're doing. It has everything to do with the way that you're doing it, and other people will notice that, and you're gonna fucking notice that.
Yeah, it does. It makes an impact. There's so many things I'm thinking about. I kind of want to go back to this dignity thing. Like, I remember when I first moved out to my very first place as a young man, like out of my parents. I didn't have anybody but me, and I had a roommate to start, but this was my place. I was paying for it. It was mine. I was out of the house. I had my freedom. And it was like, it was probably a pretty rundown basement suite at the end of the day. But the thing is, it's mine. It was my basement suite. It was my place. Yeah. And there's a dignity in the ownership of it. It's like when you do something and it's yours, and you did it, and you put your signature on it, and you made it, and you figured out how to make it happen. Like, that feels so good. It just feels so good to do that. And there's so many little wins we can do that with. There's so many little things. And it's like, maybe you're working a job you don't want to work, but you're working that job. You're getting that money. You're making that happen. And the sense of self that comes from that is so important. And I think people, they get so distracted. I mean, including myself. I'm guilty of it too. And I got to catch myself every now and then. But it's like, we compare ourselves to others, and we think we have to be somewhere else. So we buy into the propaganda that your life's supposed to look a certain way by a certain point in your life and whatever. And all of that is just, it's all arbitrary and it's all bullshit. It's, like, your life, wherever it is your life. And there's a dignity in that. You got yourself there. And it's like, even if you fucked up, you got yourself there. And like, you got to own that and be like, I did this. I made this happen. And I can make other things happen. But if you're in that state of blaming the world, like, oh, this person wronged me and this thing didn't happen, that's not ownership. That's you living in an excuse-driven, like, take it away from self kind of model. And, like, I kind of, like, if someone, say, screwed you over, for example, you can focus on how they screwed you over and they did the bad thing, which they probably did. But you got screwed over. I got myself screwed over. I trusted someone who was untrustworthy. I trusted and set myself up for betrayal. I did it. I figured out how to get myself into this spot. Now I will do better. I can move from this. I can learn from this. I can act better with this information. And I think that's such an important part of this conversation, is that if you don't look at your life like you did it fully, you're just a victim. You're going to be in an excuse driven, like, you know, at the whim of the world, like, you know, and the world is really at the whim of you if you're willing to just take ownership and be like, I did it, and I did it so I can do others. I can do another way. But just do whatever you're doing and do it fully, and admit that whatever you did wrong, you did it. And whatever you did right, you did it. And it goes both ways. I think the other part, last thing I'm going to say on this whole thing is, we like to focus on what we did well, but we don't like to focus on what we didn't. And you got to take both, you know, you got to take both. It all comes with, you know, and when you mailed it in, you have to go, I mailed it in. And when you really gave it your all and it didn't work out, you go, I gave it my all. It didn't work out, but I gave it my all. And you're going to know that. But if you mailed it in and it doesn't work, it's like, well, you mailed it in. So could it have worked? Maybe, but you don't know because you mailed it in. And that's the problem, you know? And you got to admit that you don't know if it works. You got to admit that you mailed it in, and that's why you don't know if it works. But a lot of people mailed it in. They go, it didn't work. It's like, yeah, but you mailed it in, so you don't know if it works or not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And definitive.
There was something
being definitive.
There was something I wanted to just touch on just for a brief moment here, that, like, you know, when we talk about, like, really, you know, really doing what you're doing and throwing yourself into it, you know, I'm not here advocating it, just as I don't think you are, Brandon. I'm not here advocating for, you know, like putting yourself, like, into stress yourself to the max over this thing that you're doing, or, you know, burning yourself out doing it. Just simply saying, giving it your best. Doing your best always. I think that's, you know, there's that book, The Four Agreements. It's kind of like one of the sort of modern classics of sort of like new age spirituality, even though it's based on like a very sort of old, I think they're Aztec principles or something like that. I apologize for screwing that up, but one of these agreements, and these, by the way, these are all agreements that you make with yourself, which I love. It's like you're not making this agreement with someone else, you're making it with yourself. And one of the things that you agree to is to do your best always. And no matter what you're doing, just always do your best, because there's so much, like, because no matter what, even like you're saying, like, even if you fail, you did your best. You gave it what you had at that moment. You know, and there's also an element of where you can have compassion with yourself too, because it's not about, you know, being overly judgmental about ourselves for our mistakes and for the moments where, yeah, like we all have mediocre moments. It happens. It's not about being perfect, but just about being human and recognizing where we can learn and where we can grow. Right. But when we can acknowledge, say, you know what, I did my best and it didn't work out. Well, we can have some compassion for ourselves in that moment, you know, to say, it's like there's nothing to necessarily regret about the situation. You gave it, and you can have pride in the fact that you really went for it to the best of your ability. And no matter what, and applying this to, like, in every aspect of your life. I mean, we were talking about this, you know, before we started recording. You know, something really interesting that relates to this conversation is, you know, Japan has all of these really fascinating art forms, such as tea ceremonies and flower arranging. And it's just like, what? But people train for years. You know, like I haven't gone through it, but like based on what I have learned about, you know, a lot of these Japanese art forms, is that, you know, you'll spend, you know, the first year or couple of years doing something so small and almost insignificant, and it takes so many years to get good at this practice, right? But I'm bringing this up just because, you know, we might look at something like tea, pour it like a tea ceremony, like making tea and pouring tea. Like, who gives a shit? I'm not gonna discount that viewpoint. It's just like, yeah, I kind of get that at a certain level. Now, I've never participated in one of these ceremonies before, but I've heard people talk about these ceremonies. They've participated in them. You know, people who have gone, and they say it's like, it's so strange because it's such a simple thing, but when you're participating in it, you really feel like you are a part of something. Like, there's something so much more than tea happening in that moment. There's a whole quality of experience that you are a part of that is kind of in this inexplicable thing, but it's because you're in the presence of a master, someone who has mastered something so simple. And how many times do you meet someone who's just a master at something? Honestly, you know, so you can become a master, or at least you can put yourself into something as if to become a master at something. And you can learn a lot from taking that approach to anything. And I think this, you know, this stuff kind of keeps on like folding back in on itself from everything else that we've said. But, you know, like, people notice, right? People will notice it. It has an effect. It matters, you know, like all of these things, like, we kind of go on these little ventures in this conversation and down this one and this one. And suddenly it's just kind of come back in on itself. So, you know, maybe that's about, maybe we think about wrapping this one up in the next few.
Sure.
Unless, but if you got something to say, Brandon, you say it. Otherwise, we can talk about some beer.
Well, we will get to the beer. Okay, I have to say this. You know, one of the things that I really appreciate that you bring into these conversations, because like sometimes I'll find that I'll say something and I'm saying directly what I want to say, but you bring in an important element that sometimes gets missed in saying the direct information. So, like, for example, I was talking about, you know, I screwed up and I own the fact that I screwed up so I can get myself out of it, kind of thing, as opposed to the world did me and this person did me. But you mentioned bringing in compassion, and I have to comment on that, because that is so vitally important. It's just so important. When you fully do something, you might make a mistake, or you might not be, you know, your best might not be your best on your best day. You know, you might have done something that you hurt yourself, right? Like, you went too hard and you hurt yourself, or you got yourself sick, or you did something, like you did it too much, right? And you have to show yourself compassion, that you're human, that you can get injured, that you can make mistakes, that you can trust the wrong person, that you can do a bad deal, you know. That's part of, you know, there's an element of taking risks in going full out, right? Like, when you go for something and you really try, sometimes you don't get the great results. Sometimes you don't get the agent that says, hey, like, come over to my agency and, you know, you start an acting career. Like, that doesn't happen. Sometimes you end up in a job where no one appreciates you. No one seems to care. And the harder you work, the more they try to use you, you know. And some friends are like that. Some people are like that, you know. The thing is, it's not a problem that you found yourself in that situation, because yeah, you could look at that and say, I made a mistake doing this, but you learn, you know, you got to learn, and you got to show yourself compassion. Like, just a couple of years ago, I trusted somebody and they screwed me over a few $100, and I was like, so dumb, why did I do that? But then I was like, no, you know what, that's part of the learning process. You know, you tried, you know, you built an adult relationship with a new person, you try and figure it out, and then money's exchanged, you realize this person's screwing you over, and you're like, oh shit. So I got to show myself compassion. I I see where I maybe went wrong. I see the warning signs I didn't really pay attention to. Um, I can kick myself over and over for making a mistake, but I have to show myself compassion. And you know what? I just don't think that you're ever going to go through life unscathed, really, really doing it. So you got to have compassion, because you got to know that you're going to get bumps and bruises. You're going to get hurt a little bit. Part of falling in love is breaking your heart. It's just part of the job. It's part of the whole thing. So um, I really love that you brought that element
Well, I
in.
mean,
And
you
yeah, go ahead.
just quickly, I want to say, like, you won't get out unscathed, even if you're not doing it. If you're only doing it halfway, like, no matter what, like, you're not gonna get out unscathed, unmarked, untouched by, the many myriad of situations that life throws at us. And I also just wanted to comment as well quickly on sort of this notion of, you chose this. Now, who knows? In many ways, like, you can ask, it's like, well, why would I choose it? And it's like, yeah, like, there are situations like, yeah, why would you choose that to happen? One of the ways I've also heard it phrased is, maybe you didn't choose for this thing to happen, but take a look at it as if you did. What if you did choose this to happen? Why might you have chosen this to happen? Because there's an opportunity there for us to gain perspective on something there, right? So as opposed to, I'm just addressing this because, like, that's a kind of a complicated territory, but it can sometimes be easier to just say, like, well, like, looking at it as if you chose it has an interesting sort of benefit and wisdom to it when we look at it from that way, because it's not about, because I know people who can be like real self-gluttons for punishment that way, where it's like something bad happened, and they're just like, oh, I made this happen. Oh, and it's just like, it can become a really easy vehicle to just, tear yourself down.
I agree.
Is what I mean. And that's not useful. That's not a useful thing to tear yourself down. It's useful to learn, but bringing yourself down, it does no good. And that's all.
I wasn't. I mean,
really want to say
I get that whole philosophy of, like, ultimately I chose this outcome, like the outcome that came. But I think when we go into things, we're more innocent. Like, we don't expect the outcome. Like when a bad thing occurs, like, you go into things with the assumption that they will work. I mean, if you get too skeptical about life and you get too jaded about it all, you just stop going in with that openness. And it's a difficult thing, when we're talking about this part of it. It's like, if you're gonna really find out what's possible in life, you're gonna have to work with other people. Like, you can only do so much alone, right? But if you really want to see what's possible, get people to work together. Now, in getting people to work together, will some people come into your circle potentially that, are not good? They're bad apples. They'll, yes. So that's the risk, right? And you don't know how it's going to come. You don't necessarily want it to come. But I'd say my best advice that I would give to, say, a young person, or actually really any person, but I'm just thinking of, like, giving advice to a young person in this scenario. I would say, go after what you want, and know that it's possible that some things are not going to work out for you. Like, some things are going to go absolutely sideways. Someone's going to screw you over, whatever. It might not happen, but go in with the likelihood that it probably will happen. And just be ready and prepared for the fact that when that happens, your job is simply to respond. By the time you figure it out, by the time you discover it's happening, it'll probably be too late. They will probably have taken you for something, or something will have happened, or your trust will be broken. The liar, the deceiver, the cheater, they don't come out right and tell, usually that's who they are. You find that out by their bad action. So Some people, you're going to learn about it through their poor behavior, and you respond to it. My brother told me a very interesting story at one point. He said he used to have all these DVDs when DVDs were a real big deal. And someone stole one of his DVDs, $15 at the time, something like that. And maybe they even stole a few more. Maybe it was maybe it was like $150 worth of DVDs. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, he said something I thought was just so brilliant. He said that was $150 to find out that that person wasn't my friend. So it was worth it. And I love that, because I'm like, you know what? That's what you need to know. That sometimes, I got taken for a few $100s last year by somebody. That was a few $100s to find out that this person wasn't my friend. And I don't have to waste any more time or energy or give them any more of my resources. At the end of the day, it sucks, but it's really it's a small price to pay to find out who someone is in your life and how they are. And look, I have compassion enough to say that like that person is not a bad person at their core. But the thing is they're no good for my life. I had to learn it that way, and they're out. They're gone. You know what? Sometimes you're going to burn a relationship, and maybe you're the one that burned it. You made the mistake. You did the wrong thing. Sometimes it's innocent. And you know what? You take your lumps. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong thing. Sometimes someone else is going to say or do the wrong thing. And I think it's not about trying to, my point is, it's not about trying to protect yourself from all these things so they never happen to you. It's about knowing that they will, and being prepared to respond and deal with them, and having boundaries and deciding how you'll be and what you'll stand for when you get there, if you get there. It's just, there's thorns with the roses. It's a part of the journey, and I think that's an important thing for people to consider, because I feel like that kind of, to go back to that mediocrity thing, I feel like a lot of people go with the mediocrity type of road, that half-assed road, because they think that they're protecting themselves from this stuff. They think it's a safer choice. And it really isn't, that what you give up for protecting yourself from these things is just so great. And the unhappiness and lack of fulfillment that comes out of that is just so great. So it's not worth it. You might as well get burned. You might as well break your heart. You might as well find out, the ugliness of some people in the world. Because there's such beauty as well. And you'll never see that beauty with mediocrity. You just won't. So I feel like that's why you got to take the action. You got to do the action. You got to do it full out, and you're going to find something really cool on the other side of that. Sometimes it's going to be ugly. Sometimes it's going to be absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And I think also, just to add on to that, I don't think a person should ever feel ashamed of seeing the best in another person and having trust and faith in another person. Because again, you don't control what they're going to do, but I think that that's always a better way to go about life than going around distrusting everyone and having no faith in anybody. That sounds awfully miserable, because again, no matter which route you choose to look at things, again, you'll probably be proven to be right no matter what, but it's like, you're going to get burned one way or the other, I'm sure, and it makes me kind of think of that. This might seem kind of silly and stupid, but that movie, Our Idiot Brother, he was a guy who lived his life by always trying to see the best in people, and just trying to be a genuine and be good and do what was right. And what was so interesting is that he was looked at by his siblings, by his sisters, like kind of just this like an idiot, right? He was just kind of this idiot, and they all ended up, the movie, they all kind of have these miserable lives, is what it all kind of boils down to. And they all sort of sucked him into their miserable life and tried to use and manipulate him, and then blamed him for when things went wrong, but it was really their own doing. The whole thing was actually their fault to begin with, right? But Yeah, it just made me think of that whole thing of like, yeah, it's like you can be a good person, and sometimes like people will use you and manipulate you, and they will, but ultimately, there was one person in that whole story who was like kind of the happiest person of all of them, despite it all.
I
All
think
right.
one last thing I got to say before I do
Yeah.
beer. One last thing. I think it's good to see to look for the best in people and to try to see the good in them. And I think that it's important because at the end of the day, we need to trust each other. But important point, life is a series of learning lessons, and there is a series of patterns and a series of consistencies with people. Um, People will have behaviors, and they'll even say things. A lot of time people will tell you who they are, and people won't listen to them. Just listen, listen and pay attention. And I think part of the problem is people like they get burned, and then they say, well, I'll never trust anybody. It's like, no, just be better about like how you trust, be better about how you commit, and don't make commitments to things until you've done your due diligence, until you've learned enough, like um, something I've learned through life, because I was super self-conscious when I was young, and I just didn't have a lot of self-esteem. I eventually developed that. But what I learned about really confident people is that confident people don't try to convince you that they're awesome. They just are. They just do it. They just do their life. They're confident. It's the people who are trying to show it and flaunt it. They're not. Those are not confident people. Those are not like people. So whenever anybody's trying to show you how good they are, show you how whatever, red flag that. Because people who are really good don't try to show they're good. People who are really like honest don't try to trust me. They don't do shit like that. So these are lessons you learn as you go. But my point is that it's not about just writing everybody off as some blanket absolute. It's about being better as you navigate the world, about the choices you make, the commitments you make, and learning, learning how to respond and how to take in information and really listen and pay attention and watch and observe. So I just feel like that's a really important point to say. On to the beer, sir. Let's do the beer.
On to the beer. All right. Well, I'll start because maybe mine is less exciting or more exciting depending on your angle on this. So because it's January and I'm doing like a alcohol-free January, I was not having any kind of beer, but then our last guest, Karen Pasqua, had a de-alcoholized beer, and I thought, well, shit, maybe I'll go and check that out. So this is from Red Racer. This is a local craft brewery. This is their street legal IPA. De-alcoholized IPA. And it's interesting because when I first tasted it, when I first cracked it open, I was like, oh, something tastes weird about this. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it's just like one of those things that needed to settle or something like that. But it's good. Like, it's like drinking, tastes like an IPA, but super light. Like, it just tastes really, really light. And I'm happy for it because, like, I was missing the taste of beer. And now I get to have my cake and eat it too, so to speak. So good stuff.
That's awesome. Well, this is a beer, and I love this beer. And I don't know, we might have had this on the podcast already, and I'm pretty sure we probably already did. I know I had one last night, and I'm having one today. This is by Steel and Oak Brewing Company, another local brewery, and it's called Shiny Things. And it's their India Pale Ale, and it is delicious. It's a really good beer. It smells great. It tastes great. Only good things to say about this one.
Steel and Oak is solid. They've always been solid. So excellent. Well, let's wrap this baby up. Again, with running the risk of just, repeating myself and over the course of this one, I think it's just a reiteration of, when you really do something, really, really do it. Just really, really do it, because when you make that the way in which you go about your life, it has the power to transform everything. It can bring you into the here and now of your life. It can help you to notice and acknowledge the subtle little beauties of everything that's going on around you. I mean, what more reason do you need to just throw yourself into whatever it is that you're doing? I think that there's just, that's where the life is. The life is where we're fully engaged, no matter what we're doing. Because I don't know necessarily how else it happens. It's not going to happen otherwise in many respects. So I think I'll just leave it at that. So I'll turn it over to you, Brandon.
All right. I'm reminded of a quote or a saying. Something that goes like, hell is going there and finding out who you could have been. And another one that I'm reminded of is that hell is not a place you go, but something you carry with you. And when I think of this talk, I think of that kind of like half-assed life that you live as hell. It's just like a hell, you hate your job. You don't want to do this thing. You don't want to do that thing. And so you don't really do any of them. And you kind of just float through, and then you just wait for your break so you can distract yourself. And I just think that's a kind of hell. And I'm not surprised that a lot of people are depressed and upset, and they have all sorts of issues going on. And then they have a lot of vices, like maybe they drink too much, or maybe they sleep around too much, or maybe maybe it's drugs or TV or video games or gambling, whatever. Or maybe they pop a pill to feel better. And I feel like, a lot of that is that you're trying to escape your existence. And not that any of those things in and of themselves are necessarily bad things. But anything done to run away from your life, to have to run away from the experience, I think that's a red flag. I think you need to pay attention to that. And I think that when we do that, we kind of know. And I think at the end of the day, it's like, the path to wherever it is that you're meant to be, where you could go, what's possible for you, is probably not very direct. I was working as a busboy, which got me into acting. I was selling shoes, which got me my first commercial. Like you think it would be direct, but it isn't. Not my first commercial, whatever, doesn't matter. Same idea. And I just think that you just got to, whatever you're doing, do it like it is the most important thing in the world. Do it like it matters. Do it like you care. And whenever you're talking to somebody, that's a really good start. You can start practicing with people. Whenever you're talking to somebody, talk to them and listen to them as though they are the most important person in the world right now. And I think that you'll start to find out that there's more to you than you realized. And there's so much more possible for you than you realized.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.